I enjoy being in nature, and I also appreciate the natural elements that are in my city, the different parks and the river and the ponds that happen to be here. There's a reason for that. I'm going to tell you a story about how I came to enjoy nature. Not only am I going to tell you a story, I'm also going to give you 5 different tips for you to use in your life to help you develop your connection to nature. So let's get started. This is A Curious Wonderful Nature, the show about discovering the joy and wonder of nature through looking at foraging, citizen science, folklore, and myths, along with some nature-oriented news. I'm your host, Quinn. Welcome. I've mentioned in previous videos how important it is to cultivate a relationship to nature, even if you live in a city. I haven't talked about how that's come about for me as someone who has lived in cities pretty much all of their life. Today's the day. I'm going to kind of tell this story in 3 sections. The first part involves my childhood. My parents were instrumental in kind of developing this sense of being curious about nature and being curious about the outside world in general. My mother was someone who was very interested in nature, and she and my dad used to take us to the forest preserve. There were woods that were located, or still are located, in the city of Chicago, and we would just walk around. My sibling and I used to go play. We would roll down the hill. My mom and her dad would point out different animals. My mom would point out squirrels. My mom really liked squirrels. They also seemed to enjoy it as well. Just being able to kind of get away from the more urban elements of our city, which is, the traffic, the pollution, the loud noises, the city. Also, with that, my parents, especially my father, had an interest in science. And our TV watching, which will date me, and that's okay. We would watch things like Mutual of Omaha's Wild Animal Kingdom, Jacques Cousteau, and Nova. These were programs that we regularly watched together as a family. I remember being really fascinated by the different groups of animals that we would see, like the underwater life that we would see with Jacques Cousteau, or I remember a lot of the shows about outer space with Nova, and just the different animals in the wild animal kingdom. So there was that kind of fascination that was developed for us as well. An odd thing that happened was that my father captured a centipede and put it in a styrofoam cup for us to take care of. This was not the really cute centipedes that, if we could think of centipedes as being really cute, I don't, but these weren't the really kind of wormy looking centipedes. This was the kind of brownish one that it looks like a running mustache, and yeah, not so appealing. But my father decided that it would be a really great idea for us to learn how to take care of a centipede. I'm not really sure why he chose that of all things. I probably would have liked a cat. We had goldfish, but we killed the goldfish. Pickle jar. Don't put fish in pickle jar. The opening's too small. The opening is too, yeah, don't do that. Back to the centipede. So I believe my father had this idea of it being kind of a science experiment, considering that in primary school science classrooms, if they're well funded, you have a variety of different types of animals being taken care of. It could be goldfish, it could be lizards, Ours had stick bugs and praying mantids when they survived. So I believe that this was one of the reasons why my father had it, just to kind of study another living thing and to observe it. So he was trying to help instill in us these observation skills. Although, centipede. There are two things I would take away from my experience as a child. Number one, and this is especially for parents, if you have children, get them exposed to nature early. Take them out, point things out that makes you curious. And note the things that gets them curious, and share those things. And so the second point is actually very closely related to that first point, and that is, let them see your curiosity. Let your child, whether it's a bonus child, whether it is a grandchild or a nephew or a niece, let them see that you are also learning. That helps them to see that learning is a lifelong thing. It lets them see that being curious is not something that is just for children. And it's also something that you guys can learn to do together. I guess this section is really for the parents. Show your enthusiasm about being outside and see how contagious that becomes. Even if you don't have kids, maybe this is also something that you can do with a friend. Here's the second part of my story. I started to get into gardening when my husband and I, when we moved in together, we got lucky and had a backyard garden. I started to learn about the soil and what things worked, what things didn't, meaning what plants worked and what plants and flowers didn't work. Got to learn about sun conditions and also about what grows in what season, and being able to kind of observe what was going on in the garden as I developed my skills as a gardener. My takeaway for anyone who is interested in cultivating their connection with nature is to have a little garden, and you don't have to have a yard. You can have something on your windowsill. You can have something on the stoop that you have access to. Or if you're lucky enough and you have a yard, there you go. What you start to do is you start to develop that sense of seasonality. What works? What comes up? What do you observe? What do you see? You also, through gardening, start to learn about different plants. So that's another way for you to start cultivating that connection to nature. You start to learn about plants and you start to learn about flowers. Also with gardening, what you'll notice is those plants that come up that you didn't plant. They are the plants that you don't even want if they're volunteers. That's right, I'm talking about weeds. You start to know what weeds are what. But you also start to see that they also pop up in other places other than your yard. You might see them in lots, and then you might even see them in your parks. You're able to start to take that experience and look at it outside of a cultivated experience, outside of a planned area, a planned garden. So I think gardening really started to open my eyes to nature outside of what I was planting, outside of what I was trying to control, especially because I had to be in tune with the seasons and in tune with the amount of sunlight that was required to allow things to grow. The third part of my story is when I went to France for the first time. We went to France through a woof experience. We landed on a flower farm, which also had an orchard and lots of potatoes. We were able to use our experience with gardening to help out with this farm. What the two owners of the farm also did, they also foraged. So we would go on different trips and they would stop the car and they would go out into the fields and start collecting different flowers. And those flowers would be used in different teas and different lotions and different kind of salves. We started to learn the different names of the different flowers and different plants from our two hosts. They would tell us what to look for, how to collect them, and in what conditions it would be safe to collect from. It became quite meditative to go out and kind of collect different flowers, a lot of chamomile, a lot of queen of the meadow. We are collecting a lot of pansies as well. And so there would be these baskets of these flowers, and it became, some of them were really quite heady in terms of their fragrance. I started to notice the different kind of bees that would be around when we were collecting. And I'd also notice the soil and like how rich the soil would look, and started making comparisons to what I was used to in Brooklyn when we had to remediate the soil quite a bit. That experience allowed me to learn a great deal, and it really made me want to have more of an experience of being surrounded by more natural elements. Again, I said how meditative it was and how calming it was and how soothing it was. Even though I was working, it was so enjoyable. When I got back, I started seeing some of the flowers that we had collected, like mallow, growing out of different cracks, and so much so I would stop, which made for some slightly awkward moments, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk, pointing out the flowers, but that's okay. That experience really opened my eyes to the different kinds of flowers that were just kind of all around. I started to notice chicory on different street corners, and then there's also anise that would be growing in different places. The takeaways here, there are two. One is having someone that knows a little more than you do to kind of help point out things for you to learn. It doesn't hurt to have someone who knows a little bit more. And you can get that from a botanical garden in your city. And you can also just get that from different videos. The other takeaway is this. Sometimes going outside of your known environment kind of helps you to look at that environment in a different way. I went to France and then came back to New York. I started looking at parks and even streets in a different way. You don't have to go all the way to another country to be able to do that. It could be even just a trip to your local botanical garden, or it could just be going to a place that you know that has a different landscape than you already have. Going outside of your everyday space can help you look at your environment in a different way. If you have the opportunity or the chance to go to a woodsy area or beachy area or desert, take the chance. Being able to go outside of your usual neighborhood or the usual places that you go allows you to kind of come back into them with a fresh pair of eyes. And that's what happened to me when I went to France and came back to Brooklyn. I was able to look at it from a different perspective. And that also helps in kind of cultivating that kind of connection to nature. That's it. That's it for some of my story. Hopefully enough so that you can glean from it some things that you can use in your life to cultivate your connection to nature. And also, I'm going to take this opportunity to do a special shout out. At the beginning, I talked about my parents and how they were instrumental in kind of establishing kind of the foundation and groundwork for my being very interested and connected to nature. Even though, like I said, we live in a very urban place. I never lacked for having some sort of knowledge of the outdoors and the natural world. So for that, I want to thank HMC and HTC. I love you very much. So thank you for tuning in again to A Curious Wonderful Nature. So my next video is going to be about what do you do? It's the winter time. What do you do? How are you enjoying nature if you are in the city? Especially this winter, which has been very cold and it's been very cold and very wintry. So until then, be curious, stay wondering, and bye for now.